Hello, thank you for joining this video panel discussion on the topic of transmission. Transmission is a key factor in the Trillium Awakening Dharma. But what is transmission? Some definitions include a subtle event whereby the radiant, awakened, and embodied being force of the teacher is effortlessly and spontaneously communicated non-verbally as a resonant effect to the student through proximity, gazing meditation, writings, focused intention, or other ways of being together. So what is transmission? Sometimes it's referred to as the X factor. Our unique, awakened, and embodied transmission helps catalyze awakenings as consciousness, as conscious embodiment, and as non-separate interconnectedness, whole being realization. This paradoxical condition the teacher is living is inexplicable to the rational mind, but the body and the whole being can and do understand it intuitively. I'm delighted to be joined today by three of my beloved friends and colleagues from the Trillium Awakening Teacher Circle, who will share their perspectives on transmission. What is it? How do we know it exists? And what role does it play in whole being realization? Joining us from Long Island, New York, is John Bottone. John says that he has always been an explorer of consciousness, realizing very early in life that how he felt inside influenced everything else. After becoming a teacher of transcendental meditation in his 20s and exploring his inner shadow life in his 30s, he became a Gestalt psychotherapist to help others unfold into more of their authentic selves. John became a teacher in 2014. He views the Trillium work as a fulfillment of psychotherapy. By establishing our awareness in embodied consciousness, the ego finally has something larger than itself to trust. The longing to surrender is fulfilled, and one's divine nature is revealed. John's recent presentation on Trillium Awakening, an important paradigm shift for our time, and Trillium Awakening through a psychotherapy perspective were both videotaped at the recent TR and are available on the Trillium Awakening website. John, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Subhaga.
Also joining us from the Northeast is Gina Netton. Gina is a spiritual teacher whose awakening started at age 15 when she had a mystical experience in which she realized herself as the heart of God. She's a longtime bhakti, devotional person, in addition to being a mystic, and she's also been drawn into healing work in addition to being a teacher. So she's a bhakti, mystic, healer teacher. A Trillium Awakening teacher since 2013, Gina is an intuitive visionary who holds an evolutionary and transformational space for students, for the collective, and for all existence. Gina's work is influenced by somatic experiencing, a natural approach to using embodied awareness to heal the effects of difficult and traumatic events. Her work is also influenced by biodynamic craniosacral therapy, focusing, human design, the Enneagram, integral theory, Thomas Hubel's mystical principles of healing, and Patricia Albert's evolutionary collective. Gina is based in Somerset, New Jersey, and you can learn more about her and all of our teachers on the Trillium Awakening website. Gina participated in a panel discussion on trust in being and the Consciousness Summit, which are also available as videos on our website. Welcome, Gina, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Subhaga.
And from Sauk, British Columbia, Canada, we are joined by Rod Taylor. Rod has been practicing and teaching awakening knowledge and techniques for over 40 years. He has a master's degree in adult education, post-secondary certification in conflict resolution, and in addition to being a Trillium Awakening teacher, Rod is also a Pangu Shenggong Qigong instructor. In 2005, through his participation in Trillium Awakening, he experienced a foundational shift into non-dual consciousness, embodied awakening that realized his infinite, non-separate wholeness, simultaneously integrated with his finite nature of individual self. Rod loves working with others to support their processes of awakening in wholeness and love. He became a teacher in 2007. Rod also participated in the video panel on Trust in Being and is the author of the wonderful book, New Principles of Awakened Relationship, that integrates the Trillium Awakening teaching into a look at intimate relationships. Welcome, Rod.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here with you.
So the way this panel discussion will unfold today will be in two rounds. I have some very general, broad questions I'm going to ask the teachers, and each one will answer in turn. And then I have more in-depth teachers, which will give questions, which will give each teacher an opportunity to speak a little bit more directly about their experience of working with transmission. So John, we're going to start with you. What is the nature of transmission?
The way I hold this is we're all energetic beings. And I think we often have learned or don't tune into that fact very clearly. But the truth is, if you walk into a room, you sense an energetic presence of that room, right? And when you meet a person, you sense that energetic presence of that person. So in that way, we're always transmitting, because it's just this energetic system that we are, right? The transmission of the Trillium process, the Trillium Awakening work, is something that Samuel Bonder, I don't even think he was aware that he had this transmission until people started reporting that they were feeling some effects from being around him or attending his workshops or whatever he was offering at that time. And he kind of put together after the fact that there was something going on, that there was something that was emanating from him that was creating this effect of awakening in the people that were spending time with him. It must have been very baffling at first. So the word transmission was, I think, a word that came out of the explanation of this effect that was taking place. And then as more and more people became teachers and became catalyzers of this transmission force, it was almost like their energetic systems stabilized in it and started to transmit it to others. They found that this effect was actually something that teachers could produce in other people.
Mm.
And I think what's kind of interesting is that ever since becoming a teacher of Trillium and doing gazing, because gazing is the way that we impart the transmission to others, and in some ways magnetize the field that we're in, I've become very, very aware of how powerful and almost palpable this transmission actually is, because I've just become very sensitized to it. I'm very aware of the strength of it, and really love that it has this effect of catalyzing this very powerful awakening process. In some ways, it's actually pretty extraordinary that it actually has this capacity to produce this embodiment and this opening to consciousness. And it's really quite wonderful. I'm going to end here because the phone is just going on and I don't want to be recorded.
Okay, thank you, John. That's great. Okay, Gina, let's turn things over to you. What is the nature of transmission to you?
Yeah. Well, I've, in addition to what John said, I'd just like to point, I guess, us out to that my sense is that transmission is both a natural and a supernatural phenomenon. And I think John did a beautiful job of describing the natural aspect of transmission, but I think there's also a supernatural aspect to it, just as in the awakening, right? We're awakening to being simultaneously formless and form, simultaneously the natural and the supernatural, the transcendent and all that emerges and arises and blends with the transcendent, right? That's our whole being realization. And so I think just as we can refer to the whole being realization as a biospiritual event, we can also refer to transmission as a biospiritual event. So the biological aspect of it, that natural aspect of it, is definitely that energetic aspect that John was talking about. And, where a person, a body who's had their realization starts to vibrate at a certain frequency and is able to transmit that. And then those who are, in their field are receivers of that. And then as receivers start to eventually vibrate with that same frequency, like two tuning forks. And we often use that analogy of a tuning fork, one tuning fork being having a vibration, and then another tuning fork, coming and being able to vibrate at the same vibration. So again, yeah, that's the natural aspect of transmission. But I think the supernatural, it's not only a tangible energetic experience, it's also a supernatural phenomenon, I think, as well. Or maybe that's a misnomer. Phenomenon is probably not supernatural, but anyway, there's transmission conveys like a supernatural knowing, right? And this communication is beyond the body mind. So it's this knowing is mysterious. This knowing is of ourselves as the mystery, and it's mysterious. And I would liken it to, I just thought of this example, earlier. So it's like a mirror. So the transmission becomes like a mirror, and we might not be able to see ourselves because we have, blinders on our eyes. So, and eventually, though, the more that we're exposed to this mirror, eventually the blinders fall off the eyes, or maybe we're like seeing like this for a while or whatever, but eventually the blinders fall off and we're able to see ourselves, to know our true nature, right? And so I don't know if that has an energetic component to it. I don't know. I experienced that aspect of it as more supernatural and more mysterious, and so that something I wanted to say about transmission. And the other thing that I wanted to say is just that I think that also our intention also catalyzes our intention as when we're gathering together in a sitting, also catalyzes the transmission. So the field that we actually create together, not just, yes, definitely the person who is a transmitter, but then it's also the intention, all the people that are gathering together, that amplifies that transmission and becomes, even stronger. And so it strengthens the field of consciousness and amplifies the strength of the transmission. And the other thing I just was going to say, you mentioned, I think at the beginning, about that it happens with gazing and meditation, but also in videos and photos and writings, that they also convey transmission. And so I just wanted to say what happens with that is that we're actually tuning in to the person's awake consciousness, kind of like a radio station. I liken to it like a radio station. And so, yes, then we're able to tune into those frequencies. But again, this mysterious knowing is also conveyed as well. So.
Great, thank you. It's beautiful. I love that the bio-spiritual part, to bring that piece in to the awakening process, feels very important and a nice way of sort of dovetailing with John's understanding. So Rod, for you, what's the nature of transmission?
Well, I remember coming into this work long ago, as 2003, and wondering what was going on here. And I heard something about the term transmission, but I didn't really quite get it. I came in with quite a strong background in the field of consciousness, and I had experienced profound, what I would call transmission or effect in the environment that affected me in terms of deepening, opening, expanding in consciousness. And this I didn't notice in that same way. And I came from a background of Qigong practice and energy practices, and inner subtle energy experience. And this didn't feel kind of like that. And of course, I also had the experience of the flow of love in family and with others that was tangible in being in the presence of others. And that too wasn't clear to me. So I came in wondering what this was about, but deciding to try it out and wondering about it. And I enjoyed gazing. Enjoyed means I was comfortable gazing, but didn't really, tune into it. And it was only after months and then having a deep experience in a long retreat that I experienced myself, my conscious field drop into my body and feel a core center in my own being. And from that point onward, I noticed when I was in the group or I was gazing, I could feel an activation within myself. So I began to realize, okay, something is going on here. As I've become interested in what this is, I've recognized that this, what we call transmission, is very much a resonance. It's not so much one person doing it to another as much as it is our own being's interest, capacity, melting, you could say, in the presence of an embodied wholeness that brings us a sense of something that our own being naturally is inclined towards. It doesn't require noticing it, as I didn't notice it for quite a while. But when we notice it, we can feel a certain type of wellness, groundedness, comfortness, attractiveness to be whole in that way that seems to be not as obvious as those other fields of transmission that I mentioned, but is actually including the interconnectedness amongst folks that are engaged, open to, and having a ground or background in this. So we're talking about, to me, an additional way that's special to this work, or anyone, you could say, who is opening in to this whole being form of deepening, opening, and awakening. That whole being quality includes the conscious nature, it includes the grounded embodiment, and it also includes the way that we're non-separately interconnected. And that transmission is a wholeness that, to me, comes by being open to each other. With a teacher, with others that have awakened and found themselves integrating in their own well-formed kind of acceptance and comfort in being their grounded wholeness. And also we've seen quite an effect in peer groups that have a mixture of folks that are opening in that way, and how rewarding it is and how evolving it is to be together with folks that have these full components. You could say these three dimensions of what we might call transmission, or more comforting for some to realize it's a resonance. My own being is being activated. My own being is being attracted and inviting.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And that's such a great segue to my next question, although I see that these three questions have sort of interwoven in everyone's answers. So let's turn it over to to John. How do we know transmission exists?
I have two great stories around this. When I first got into this work, which was Waking Down at the time, I remember I would sit at my computer and I would gaze with photos of teachers, right? And what I noticed myself was this diminishment of fear was starting to happen almost immediately. And I remember thinking, that is very interesting. Like something was just settling down and I could feel it. Now, my husband, Richard, is an energy worker. So he does energy work and energy healing. So he has the capacity to sense energetic systems and things like that. Well, one morning, I was gazing at my computer and he was walking by, and I called him in and I said, "Do you notice anything? Can you see anything happening while I'm gazing with this photo?" And he sticks his head in the room and he kind of looks at me and he looks at the thing. He goes, "Oh yeah." He says, "I see what's going on." I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, your heart chakra, it's like, you know how a locomotive's like chugga, 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 like the wheels kind of move in and out?" He said, "Your heart chakra is doing that kind of thing." He said, "It's like it's clearing itself." And I thought that was fascinating because here was, evidence that there was actually some clearing process that was taking place. And it really, in many ways, supported what I was experiencing. Just like Rod said, it's something we resonate with and our bodies know it's happening. But I guess my skeptical mind wanted proof, right? Mm. So then a few months later, Samuel and Linda were doing a sitting in New York City. And I went and I grabbed Richard. I said, "You're coming to this." And there must have been about 30 people there. And when we did the gazing, they actually sat in the front of the room and they had like an on-deck chair and you would wait, and then it was your turn, you gazed with Linda, then you gazed with Samuel, and then you moved on. So the whole group would kind of rotate through in that way. And eventually everybody went through this process and we all gazed with them. I don't remember people gazing with each other at that time. It was just with them. But afterward, I asked Richard what he saw during this gazing, and he described it like a Rubik's Cube. He said what happened was everybody's energetic centers lined up with each other. So they lined up front to back, they lined up side to side, almost like a cube formation was established. And the energy that Sandy and Linda were sending around was kind of supporting and supplying the energetic in the cube.
Wow.
So these were wonderful experiences and confirmations that there was actually a very powerful energetic presence and force being established when people were gazing.
Beautiful. Those who have eyes can see it, as the saying goes.
It was great.
That's lovely. Thank you, John. That's great. So, Gina, how do you know that transmission exists?
Well, let's see. I would answer that from two different perspectives. One is that it can be experienced, and the second is that we can see its effects. And so it can be experienced by some, but not all folks, as Rod pointed out. But just because it can't be experienced, and it's imperceptible to some, doesn't mean that it's not happening. So, but some people can experience it, and I, I'm very in tune with the body, been in tune with body and energy my whole life, and just designed that way. And I know that there are people who are not, but how I experience the Trillium Awakening transmission is like a warm melting that starts in the heart and kind of pervades my whole body and my head. And it's kind of like molten lava flowing, I feel like this molten lava flowing. And then I tune into the whole room, and it feels like others are also flowing in the same way, and then we're all one lava flow. And that's how I experience, the transmission. And I often feel heat, and warmth and actual heat. And sometimes my glasses will fog up. and sometimes there's like a mist in the room, and sometimes people disappear. This is during, oftentimes during gazing. I experienced that, and I know that other folks in sittings have also reported similar things to this, like mist and disappearing and heat and things like that. So also in meditation, I think we also, I experienced transmission there too, where all like stillness is amplified. And it's like all of a sudden, it's like the whole group has like dropped into this unified stillness that becomes deep and thick and heavy in a way, and just very deeply embodied, I guess, in that sense, right? And so that everyone is sort of dissolved into this stillness. And so, yeah, so that's another aspect of how, I experience it. And then also, it can be very enlivening and activating and stimulating. And then some people, have difficulty sleeping, like especially in long retreats, for example. I'm sure you just experienced that at the TR. And, that the Transfiguration retreat, that it can, be overstimulating in some people. And in terms of the effects, I think what we can see is that it has this contagious quality to it, right? So at the onset, as John mentioned, people were waking up around Saniel and just becoming in close proximity to him and having repeated, exposure to him, and he was doing sitting so often. We also see this in the longer retreats, right? Then when people, have, an 8-day retreat or something like that, and they're exposed to the transmission for a long period of time, and all of a sudden they pop into their awakening, into their whole being realizations. So those are some, I think, ways in which we can know that it exists through the experience and the effects we see.
Okay, great. Very good. Okay, Rod, and from you, how do you know, or how do we know that transmission exists?
Well, I had that thought after I did go through my own whole being realization and was thinking back, what brought this about? Because I had been an avid, you could say, seeker, practitioner, teacher in the field of spiritual and personal development for 30 years before coming to this work. So I thought, well, there's similar things that we've done here. It's some interactions, some groups getting together, being with the teacher, and yet something different happened. And what was that? And it led me to acknowledge that transmission X factor that I didn't need to think about while it was going on, but I had come into a different field of inner experience that my being didn't know before. It knew these elements that I mentioned earlier, but it didn't know this inner grounded wholeness. And from my perspective then, it was, this field has been available for this being to feel a growing resonance, a melting, an activation of being myself fully whole here in these dimensions that I think were supported by being both consciously tangible in ways I've already mentioned, but unconsciously true in being in a field that was quietly attractive to my own being's capacity and all of our being's capacity, to settle into it. And so from that perspective, I came to that recognition. It was satisfying. And then first as a mentor and then as a teacher, I realized that when I love to be with people who are interested in exploring their own evolution together. And when we would gaze together and when I would talk with them, there wasn't actually anything I noticed myself needing to do other than be heartfully with them in attention, caring, and responsiveness. And then just being myself, you could say, I started to notice people were saying, oh, wow, I really enjoyed the transmission, or, oh, I could feel the love, I could feel the field. And I thought, okay, this is something beyond doing. This is kind of a condition of being that when we connect with each other and feel open, then something's going on. And it was another way that I kind of appreciated, and it's so effortless. It's just being true to our own nature, this wholeness nature that now has been fully kind of embedded in our being, and it affects each other.
Beautiful. That's great. Thank you so much. So I think in the interest of time, I'm going to sort of merge what I had as my third general question into these specific questions I have for each of you as Trillium Awakening teachers and practitioners in different fields. So John, I'm going to come back to you. As a practicing psychotherapist, what role does transmission play in the process of healing, particularly in terms of embodiment? Because you did speak about that a bit.
Right. I was trained and certified as a Gestalt psychotherapist. I did a 3-year postgraduate training after I got my master's in counseling in Gestalt therapy. One of the fascinating things about Gestalt therapy is actually a therapy that came out of the exploration of why we have such a difficult time staying in the present moment. Because Gestalt therapy considers the present moment, right, as a healthy, happy, pleasurable place to be. Just to be in the present, right? And kind of suggests that the goal of therapy is actually to make us more in the present, keep us more in the present moment experience, right? And then there's a whole therapy that analyzes how we leave and why we leave and blah, 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 blah. But what's fascinating, so from that point of view, the fact that this transmission actually brings people into the embodied present is almost the same thing that psychotherapy is trying to do, at least experiential therapies are trying to do. It's trying to bring you into the present moment. And when I work with people, that's often what I'll do with them. I'll have them just say, what's happening? What's happening right now? What are you aware of? What's taking place? What's here? Is something I'll often say to a client. What's here? Because often people will move into their heads as opposed to just being in the embodied present, in their felt sense, right? So the fact that this transmission does that it catalyzes people dropping into their more embodied experience, is actually quite extraordinary. It's really quite an amazing thing, right? Mm-hmm. And what I've come to appreciate in this Trillium work is that we really are involved in a paradigm shift. One of the reasons why it's so difficult to stay in the present moment is because we've all grown up in a culture that has a whole different paradigm. The paradigm is to be in our heads. We've all learned that we're supposed to be in our heads. We're supposed to be in charge of everything. The head controls the body. The head controls nature, right? Money buys security. We all grew up in a paradigm that was so not present-centered. It's very much head-centered, right? So Trillium is actually, once we are exposed to this transmission and we stop dropping into our embodied experience, we're actually moving into a completely different paradigm than we grew up in. And the new paradigm is to be more in our bodies, be in our hearts, be in our guts, be much more present in this embodied place, and starting to live from there, starting to live from that place. So in a lot of ways, it's accomplishing the same goal that psychotherapy does, right? It's pretty extraordinary. One of the reasons why I like to say that Trillium is the fulfillment of psychotherapy is because while it embodies us, it also opens us into this expanded conscious nature, right? It opens us into an experience of our divine nature, of consciousness, right? And that is also something that transpersonal psychology talks about as the highest stage of human development, is to move beyond self-actualization into self-transcendence. That the highest thing we could do in human development is to move into self-transcendence. And that's another quality that this transmission accomplishes. It opens up our conscious nature, our expanded nature, and we start to experience that there's something larger than ourselves organizing our lives. There's something larger than ourselves that is at play, that our heads are not able to do it all. In fact, they can't do it all, right? And we start to surrender to this larger awareness. So we have this phrase, trust in being, right? Trust in being is that we can begin to trust there's something larger than ourselves organizing everything. And that's the place where the ego can surrender to something bigger than itself. The ego actually doesn't want to do it all. The ego really doesn't want to do this job that it's been given. But until it has something larger than itself to surrender to, it's going to keep trying. It's going to keep trying its best. But once it can surrender to something larger, it does. And then we start to live this experience of wholeness. We start to live this experience of well-being. You know, we don't have to work so hard to be in our lives in a very enjoyable, pleasant way. So it's really quite an extraordinary thing that Trillium is able to bring about. I think the transmission brings us into whole being realization. I think it's the catalyzer. And then I think what happens, and this is my own thoughts about this, I think once we drop into that experience of whole being realization, I think the transmission actually becomes part of our energetic system. I think it becomes stabilized in a way in our energetic system. And then from that point on, we start to transmit it to others. So in a lot of ways, we're walking around in the world creating this paradigm shift. We're creating this effect, you know, wherever we go. I mean, it's quite wonderful that we're able to do this. And hopefully, as we continue to do this and walk in the world and be in the world and gaze with people and hold sittings and, you know, bring this transmission to larger and larger groups, that there will be just this ongoing effect in the world.
Beautiful. So there's a way in which the more we are able to drop in, as practitioners even are able to drop in and be present and be in the body, it's really non-separate. You can't really separate the things out. It's like the more transmission we're exposed to, the more embodied we become, and the more embodied we become, the more transmission we're able to metabolize and create that place of rest. I love the way you spoke about the ego, because it's almost as if the more the body comes online, the whole being comes online, and embodied consciousness, the ego can just relax and shift over and become more the co-pilot than the pilot.
Yeah, exactly. It can assume its natural place in the larger system. And I think until we get to this shift into whole being realization, we don't really begin to do that in a really substantial way.
Excellent. That's beautiful. Yeah. Thanks so much. I'm going to turn it over to Gina, who's done work in somatic experience, which also focuses on healing through embodiment. So can you speak a little bit about how the field of transmission works for you, Gina, in your somatic experience work with students?
Let's see, I think I would probably change the question slightly in terms of how I know transmission is at work in the students that I work with. Mm-hmm. And I'm often using somatic experiencing principles as I'm working with people. Is that, well, first of all, let me speak again from my personal experience, that I know the transmission was really reworking me after my awakening. After my awakening, I got exposed. I was going to sittings basically every week, lots and lots of exposure to transmission. And what started to happen to me, and I also felt that opening in my being. This was a post-awakening, so I could feel the transmission coming inside me as well. I could feel that energetically. And so what was happening also at that time was all kinds of trauma started coming up for me. And I felt it like bubbling up, like, you know, a bubbling volcano. And I felt like it was going to erupt if I didn't do something about it. And so that's why I reached out and actually got exposed to somatic experiencing, went and received somatic experiencing and also biodynamic cranial sacral, and was able to, that integrative work was able to help me in the reconfiguration process of working with all of these traumas and energies that were coming up that were unresolved. And all of that is, we know that trauma is hidden in our bodies. And so as the transmission is coming in, as that biospiritual event that we were talking about, and is this awareness, this felt sense awareness that's actually going in and seeping into our bodies, I was like, okay, it's finding where there are pockets of trauma or wounds or different things that need to be seen, different things that need to be brought to the light of consciousness. And so that's what I experienced myself. This is what I have experienced in my clients, my students. And so I think that, what's happening is the transmission is really doing a great deal of work, not only actually, bringing us to the awakening, obviously, and kind of, in a magnetizing way, and kind of, magnetizing the latent realization into whole being realization. But also what is very, very important in the whole reconfiguration process of integrating all these things that need to be brought back into alignment, that need to be made conscious, that anything that's unresolved will come up for resolution in wholeness. And so, I think that you can you can really see that transmission then transforms us from the inside out. It's like what I like to say, and let's see. There was a point I wanted to make about. Let's see. I'm sorry. Okay. Yes. No. Having a bit of a brain fog here. I've been studying biodynamic craniosacral therapy, and recently was in a biology lecture that was quite interesting, was talking about cellular function and how biochemical signals are sent out, and the receptors of those signals actually interact with the signal and induces change. And so I just really see this as what's happening in our biospiritual event of transmission, that it's this awakened transmission is basically interacting with the receiver and transforming the receiver from the inside out. And I also wanted to say about a few things about transmission and our nervous systems, and that is that it's really important, I think, for people who have a lot of history with having a very intense fight-flight response, that they be able to resource themselves when they're exposed to the transmission. Because what can happen is they can have a very big expansion and then have afterwards with it when they're exposed to the transmission, and then a very big contraction afterwards that can be very destabilizing and disorienting rather, And so I think it's really important that people who know that they are sensitive like that really be able to resource themselves, and as they're exposed, to the transmission. And also, one of the things that can happen too is that people around you, like you can actually carry the transmission with you for some time, like after the retreat that just happened, right? The transfiguration retreat. I was doing a session with a student, and it was like a week later, and I could feel the amplified transmission coming from her, right? And I've had many students talk about how, they come home from a workshop or a sitting or a retreat, and things just go haywire in their family because everyone gets either agitated or, it kind of starts to transform everything around. And so I see transmission is really like this felt sense awareness, right? That's entering our bodies in this felt sense awareness kind of way, and is, again, shining the flashlight on anything that needs to be made conscious. And so I would say also a really important thing to do, we talk about relaxation and relaxing into this awakening and relaxing into being. And it's really important to let the transmission do the work of the reconfiguration of the whole process, to relax and let that transmission do the work. And that really helps us to develop a trust in being, actually. So the more that we can expose ourselves to the transmission, really allow it to do the work, and really, really realize that we are that flow of light, of consciousness, of beingness. It's like we are the transmission, basically, realizing we are the transmission. And then you also had posed a question to me about, is it quantifiable? And I just want to say that I do believe that transmission is possible to quantify. And in the same way that you have meditation experiments that have been done with meditators, right? And they've, done EEG studies, and they've done, MRIs and PET scans of people's brains and so forth. I think we could have the same thing with folks in our work, and we could. That would be a fun experiment to do. And I think we would definitely see that there would be quantifiable evidence of the transmission in process and the effects of the transmission. And I also think in terms of effects, we could also those are also very quantifiable. We could do a study in which, we interview people and ask them what happened in their especially post-awakening process, and you could see what the effects were. So those are some ideas that I had to share. And
beautiful, thanks so much. Yeah, I just saw something recently where there has been some scientific research on sort of the energetic field of the body, And so I think that sort of ties in with what we've been saying about transmission. And, what I loved about the way you spoke about it is that transmission is both sort of the light that penetrates and illuminates. Sometimes, the pockets, as you said, of trauma can come bubbling forward once we've sort of bathed in that field of conscious awakening, but it can also be part of the healing process. So it both reveals and heals, through the way it penetrates the various subtle layers of the body, and helps us to see where we need to bring our attention and so on. So it's quite a wonderful response to those things. Great. So Rod, we shift the gaze just a little bit here. Your focus has been on awakened relationship and awakening as love. What role does transmission play in awakened relationship?
Yes. Well, when we talk about awakened relationship, we're talking about folks who have come into their own whole being realization and are in relationship with each other, either in intimate connections or in family close connections, or with others that we feel open to and feel drawn to being in ongoing relationship with. Now, humanity has come through a time of increasing individualization, which has meant actually increasing separation. As we become more defined as individuals, we've also become more defined in our separation. Separation within ourselves, we should be better than we are, we need to get better, we need to improve, we need to succeed, and also with other people. We're in separation with them. We're trying to cooperate, but we're cooperating with a separate other. And even with the environment, you could say, we're trying to achieve and accomplish while damaging the environment. So we're talking about a history of relationship that has been evolutionarily, appropriately part of this individualization process in humans' evolution. This whole being realization is bringing in another ground of being from that experience, one that is not separate. Not separate within the self, because we're actually becoming into this interconnected wellness of being who we are. It's not separate from the other, because we're realizing our non-separateness while recognizing the difference. And in terms of the universe, we're realizing an awareness and a connectedness that is honoring and all that we are and all that we see, and knows that is us, and all of that affects us. So bringing that into play in a relationship, awakened realizers aren't finished. They have lots of unfinished business. But that unfinished business is being more dynamically and automatically evolved through this ground of whole being realization. So if we put two people together who are carrying that recognition within themselves of inner wellness, non-separateness, interconnectedness, then there is a reinforcing quality of activating transmission that's shared between them. Not shared in needing to do something to the other, shared in this common recognized ground of wholeness, wellness, connectedness. So this means then that not that the relationship is going to necessarily be easy, because we've been all learned from childhood how to operate increasingly in separation and in negotiation with the other. In this case, we're finding ourselves not needing in the same way to be fulfilled by the other in terms of our weaknesses. We're actually finding our own ground of wellness in which our meeting of the other, our dance with the other, is not anymore so much about trying to get our needs fulfilled, but actually finding ourselves increasingly grounded in our wellness and open to the enchantment of interacting in a dance of life with another, in which we get to discover a different other. Some of those differences are quite awkward, and they throw us back in, oh, I need them to be different. Oh, but I don't. And so that ground of transmission is a percolating storm for some and a resolution for all in terms of a mutual transmission, or you could say more honorably, a mutual ground of resonance. I say honorably because it's honoring the recognition and realization that is a common field that arises in the differences and is supported by the wholeness. And as people are growing in their whole being realization, which is initially consciousness, conscious embodiment, non-separate interconnectedness, it grows and integrates through the ongoing evolution that comes through this ground and becomes more the wholeness, trust, and love. We find ourselves operating as love, through love, with love. Not as a good conscious intention, but as a truth of the discovery of our wholeness, our deep beingness. So then we find, whoa, this transmission adds something to our life that is already well and whole. And so in my own experience, it's been lovely with my love, Andrea, to find that being in our awakened natures, which is, you could say, autonomous wellness within ourselves, I feel my life enriched and enhanced by being in relationship with her. It's like our transmissions are bringing different aspects of our awakened character natures into a relationship in which it impacts the couplehood. And so for me, being more kind of spacious, transcendent in my realized nature, and her being more embodied in the creative nature of her being, I find that I'm living more richness in my life, more embodied richness, you could say, when she's around. And it's very interesting to notice if she's away, I'm being my well self, but I feel that much more that spacious kind of not so grounded kind of condition of my own awakened nature, which I enjoy. But when she's back, I'm engaged in the richness of living life. So you could say that our awakened natures, you could call it transmission or resonance or shared field, are creating a greater richness, wholeness, and fulfillment for me as someone who found his wholeness within and finds it enhanced in relationship with her. And likewise with others that we come to know, like each of you. The richness that I have when we're engaged with each other is a new element of this awakened relationship and this one. All facets of the nature of wholeness that we've awakened into in this whole being field, of whole being realization, whole being relationship, and whole being wisdom that we get to share and interact with. In resonance, we might call it transmission, but it's even beyond that because we're actually co-conscious within a wholeness field of whole being realization.
It's so beautiful. I love the way you were just speaking about the field and the wholeness of that field, because for me, there is a different quality to intimacy when this field of awakened transmission is online. I mean, I certainly have this in my own intimate relationship with my partner Subhaga, who's also a teacher in our work, and we can be in the same physical space, but not really communicating verbally, or even non-verbally in really different parts of the house. But I know her presence is there because I can feel the field of her transmission. And if we're in closer proximity, then it's really amplified, like when we're teaching together online and sharing a computer and we're sort of sitting right by each other, the amplification of the transmission field is quite profound. Or even when we do nectar at events, we invite people to come and be in close proximity with each other, to lay together on the floor or on couches to cuddle or to just sit in that room. There's a different flavor of transmission, I find, than just being in the small group or the medium-sized group where the transmission is working in a different way. So there's so many flavors of intimacy that come through in this work through the field of transmission. So really encourage everyone, if you haven't read Rod's book, it's in a second edition. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful exploration of the nature of awakened relationship, and I think would be a benefit if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about how to live in this way. So I think that's going to draw us to conclusion today. It's been a wonderful conversation. We've covered a lot of area about transmission and the role that it plays in our work individually and collectively. I want to thank each of you for participating. So I'm going to put us on gallery view for a moment so that everybody is visual and visible and we can see each other, beautiful presences. And thank you so much for being part of this conversation. And I look forward to seeing each of you again another time, either in person or on this Zoom screen. So thank you very much.
Subhaga. Thanks for hosting this.
Yes,
so much.
thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Hopefully there will be more of these kinds of video panels in which students will have the opportunity to meet a variety of different teachers and hear what they have to say on topics that are pertinent to our Dharma. So I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Subhaga. Wonderful to be with you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.